Every night, I hear her voice waiting, and she warned me, if I keep coming, she'll start expecting me. The first time I saw her, it was a quiet night, the kind that leaves the city in a soft hum of distant car horns and the occasional barking dog. I had just moved into my new apartment, still unpacking boxes and figuring out the rhythm of this unfamiliar neighborhood. It was past 10, and I decided a short walk might clear my head, the chill of early autumn brushing against my skin. She was in the courtyard, standing under the faint glow of a street lamp. Her figure caught my attention immediately, not because she was striking in a loud, dramatic way, but because she moved with a quiet grace that made the mundane seem intentional. She was in her early 40s, I guessed, with the kind of elegance that comes from confidence shaped by experience. Her hair fell loosely around her shoulders, catching the lamplight, and her eyes held a mix of warmth and wistfulness that made me pause mid-step. "Hi," I said, unsure if I should. She smiled, a small, almost hesitant curve of her lips. "Hello?" she replied, her voice calm but carrying a subtle timbre that made it linger in the air. There was an immediate sense of familiarity, as though this was a meeting both of us had been unconsciously anticipating. We started talking casually, about trivial things, the flickering lamp over the entrance, the way the wind rustled the leaves. But our conversation stretched longer than either of us seemed willing to end. She had a soft laugh, easy and unassuming, and it made me feel as though the late hour and the empty courtyard were not so lonely after all. At some point, she reached for the small basket of mail she had set beside the entrance. Her hand brushed mine, just for a second, and yet it sent a quiet warmth through me, subtle but insistent. There was no rush, no awkwardness, just a fleeting awareness of proximity that neither of us spoke aloud. I noticed the little details, the gentle tilt of her head when she listened, the way her fingers lingered around the edge of the basket, the faint scent of her perfume mixed with the crisp night air. She had a presence that was understated but impossible to ignore. Before long, the conversation wound down, and we parted ways with a polite smile, though either of us moved quickly. I felt a strange reluctance, a desire to linger a little longer, as if the night itself was reluctant to let us go. That brief encounter planted a seed, a curiosity that stirred quietly in my chest, a sense that this woman, this neighbor, might become more than just a fleeting figure in the dim light of the courtyard. Walking back to my apartment, I realized I was already anticipating seeing her again, wondering what she might be doing in her apartment, whether she would be awake, whether we might talk once more. And I couldn't shake the feeling that our paths crossing in that quiet night was more than coincidence. It was the start of something quietly, irresistibly compelling. After that first unexpected encounter, I began noticing her more often at night. It wasn't something she did deliberately, or at least she didn't make it obvious, but from my apartment window, I'd catch the soft glow of her kitchen light or the muted shadow of her figure moving across the balcony. Somehow, those small glimpses made the city feel smaller, quieter, more intimate, as though the world had carved out a private corner just for us. One night, I found myself lingering near her door, holding a mug of tea I hadn't meant to make. I had no reason to knock, none at all, but the urge to see her again was surprisingly insistent. When I finally did, she opened the door with that same gentle smile, though this time there was a flicker of surprise. "You're early," she said softly, stepping aside to let me in. "I couldn't sleep," I admitted. The words felt inadequate, but they were the truth. There was a quiet invitation in her gesture, the way her hand lingered on the doorframe, and I stepped inside without hesitation. Her apartment was warm, dimly lit, a cozy refuge from the chill outside. The faint scent of vanilla and old books lingered in the air. She offered me a cup of tea, and as our fingers brushed over the mug, I felt the same subtle warmth from that first encounter, the kind that made my chest tighten, just slightly, in anticipation. We sat near each other on the small couch, knees almost touching, and the closeness felt natural, almost effortless. Conversation began casually, as before, but soon it drifted to more personal territory. She spoke of favorite books, quiet memories from before her divorce, the little things that made her laugh or pause. I listened, fascinated, and found myself sharing more than I normally would, about my move, my awkward attempts to adjust to a new city, the loneliness that sometimes settled in after dark. Each shared story, each honest word, drew us closer. Her hand would occasionally rest lightly on the edge of my arm or the side of the couch, a fleeting contact that lingered longer than necessary. I noticed the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the gentle tilt of her chin when she laughed, the quiet intensity in her gaze when she listened. Every gesture was small, subtle, but somehow heavy with unspoken meaning. Even the silence between our words carried weight. The soft hum of the city outside, the distant sound of a train, the occasional creak of the floorboards, it all became part of our own quiet world. I realized I was beginning to anticipate these nightly visits almost as much as she did, though either of us admitted it. There was a rhythm forming, a delicate balance between familiarity and something undeniably electric. When I finally left, the cool night air brushed against my face, and I couldn't help but glance back at her apartment window. The light was still on, and for a moment, I thought I saw her watching me. My heartbeat was slightly faster than before, but it wasn't fear or anxiety. It was something warmer, a quiet anticipation of nights yet to come. These nightly visits, small and seemingly insignificant at first, were beginning to shape something deeper, a subtle intimacy, a trust, and a curiosity that neither of us could, or wanted to, ignore. A week into our nightly visits, the rhythm between us had become quietly familiar. The courtyard lights, the hum of the city at night, the soft clinking of her teacup, these were no longer mere background details. They had become markers of a private world that existed between her apartment and mine. One rainy evening, she called me over unexpectedly. When I arrived, she was standing by the window, a thin scarf wrapped loosely around her neck, rain dripping in slow streams from the balcony railing. Her hair clung slightly to her face, and the air smelled of wet earth and something distinctly comforting. Her perfume mingled with the scent of rain. "The window's leaking again," she said softly, holding up a small, bent wrench. There was no complaint in her voice, just a quiet practicality. I knelt beside her, examining the frame. "I think I can fix it," I murmured, more to break the silence than because I truly needed to explain. As I reached for the wrench she was holding, our hands met over it. The brief touch, a simple brushing of palms and fingers, sent a small jolt through me. It was electric yet familiar, like a spark in a dark room that neither of us wanted to name aloud. We worked together in silence, the sound of rain against the window and the faint drip from the leak creating a rhythm for our movements. Our hands occasionally brushed, lingering just a fraction longer than necessary. I felt her warmth radiate through the thin fabric of her sweater. She felt my presence, steady and careful, beside her. At one point, our knees touched under the windowsill, and I could sense her breath catch subtly. She didn't move away. Neither did I. After the task was done, we stood close, gazing out at the rain-soaked street. She didn't speak immediately. Her silence was weighty, not awkward, and in it I felt a confession without words. She glanced at me, her eyes searching, playful yet vulnerable. "You know," she said lightly, "you're getting far too comfortable around here." I smiled, unsure if she was teasing or serious. "Comfortable isn't always bad," I said, my voice quieter than intended. She laughed softly, a sound that was warm and cautious all at once. Her fingers brushed against mine, not intentionally, I think, but it lingered. I felt an unfamiliar tension building, a mix of desire, hesitation, and the delicate thrill of connection that neither of us wanted to rush or define. In that moment, the air between us was charged, yet serene. The rain continued its steady drum outside, but inside, the quiet intimacy of shared effort, lingering touches, and unspoken feelings enveloped us. For the first time, I realized the subtle truth of our connection. We were both aware of it, the attraction, the curiosity, the hesitant longing, but neither dared to speak it outright. As I left that night, the wet air wrapped around me, mingling with the warmth of her presence that clung to my memory. For the first time, I felt that our nightly visits weren't just casual conversations anymore. Something deeper, fragile and electrifying, was forming, and it was only a matter of time before we would have to acknowledge it. The nights had settled into a rhythm, one neither of us had planned but both of us were beginning to anticipate. Our conversations had grown more personal, our silences more comfortable. Yet, amid the ease, there was a playful undercurrent that neither of us could, or wanted to, ignore. One evening, I found myself at her door slightly earlier than usual. She opened it before I could knock, as if she had been expecting me. Her hair was loosely tied back, a few strands escaping to frame her face, and she wore a soft sweater that made her look effortlessly warm. There was a glint in her eyes, mischievous yet sincere, the kind of look that made my chest tighten without any warning. "You're here again," she said lightly, stepping aside. "At this rate, keep visiting me at night, and I'll start expecting you." Her words were teasing, but there was something unspoken beneath them, a quiet acknowledgement of the bond forming between us. I laughed, feeling the familiar flutter in my chest, though I noticed the subtle way her fingers brushed mine as she handed me a cup of tea. That fleeting touch, casual yet deliberate, carried a warmth that lingered longer than it should. We settled into the living room, the low lamplight casting soft shadows on the walls. The rain outside had stopped, but the faint scent of wet earth still clung to the air, mingling with the aroma of tea and her subtle perfume. Our conversation meandered from trivial matters to shared memories of books and music, each exchange filled with a sense of intimacy that went unspoken. At one point, she reached to straighten a cushion on the couch, her shoulder brushing lightly against mine. I could feel the warmth radiating from her, the closeness sending a quiet thrill through me. She noticed, I think, because she paused, letting the contact linger, her eyes meeting mine with a hint of challenge wrapped in amusement. The tension was palpable yet gentle, a dance neither of us had rehearsed. She leaned slightly closer, just enough for our knees to graze under the small table, and I realized how natural it felt to be near her, to exist in the same space without words explaining the attraction. There was laughter, but also an awareness of the unspoken, a curiosity, a desire, a hesitation. Her teasing continued in small ways, light remarks about my lateness, gentle warnings when I lingered too long by the doorway, playful remarks about her dangerous habit of welcoming me in. Each joke carried a double meaning, a blend of affection and subtle acknowledgement of the tension between us. By the time I left that night, the hallway felt colder than usual, but my heart was warmer. Her words echoed softly. "Keep visiting me at night, and I'll start expecting you." I realized I already did. The playful warning had become a promise, a quiet invitation neither of us fully named but both understood. That night marked a turning point. The rhythm of our visits remained, but the energy between us shifted, lighter, warmer, yet undeniably charged with possibility. Every glance, every brush of hands, every pause in conversation was no longer accidental. It was part of something building slowly, irresistibly between us. By now, our nightly visits had become a comforting ritual. The initial curiosity had grown into something tender, something neither of us wanted to name aloud, but both of us felt in every shared glance and lingering gesture. That evening, the city was quiet, the night air carrying the faint scent of damp pavement and distant jasmine. She invited me onto her balcony to sit with her, a quiet space that overlooked the sleepy streets below. We sat side by side, a thin space between us that neither of us rushed to fill. I held a steaming mug of tea, and she adjusted the scarf around her neck, brushing a strand of hair from her face. There was a softness in her eyes, a quiet vulnerability that was unusual for someone so composed during the day. "I don't usually have visitors at this hour," she said softly, almost to herself. It's nice, though. You being here. I smiled, my chest tightening in a way that surprised me. I enjoy it too, I admitted. More than I probably should. There was a pause, heavy with unspoken words. I glanced at her, noticing the small tremble in her fingers as she traced the rim of her cup. It was then I realized she was letting me see a part of herself she rarely showed anyone, her loneliness, her longing for connection, and the gentle ache of past heartbreak. After my divorce, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper, nights like these were silent. Too silent. She looked away for a moment, gazing at the city lights that twinkled like scattered stars. I wasn't sure I'd ever find someone who could understand that quiet. Her words struck me. I reached out instinctively, brushing my fingers against hers, letting the contact linger just enough to communicate warmth and reassurance. She didn't pull away. Instead, her hand relaxed into mine, small and fragile, yet powerful in the intimacy it conveyed. I found myself opening up as well, telling her about the unease I felt moving to a new city, the moments when I questioned my place in the world, the subtle loneliness that had followed me despite the bustle of everyday life. She listened, truly listened, leaning slightly closer so that our shoulders touched, sharing the warmth of her presence without forcing words to fill the space between us. For a long while, we sat in silence, letting our unspoken understanding fill the night. There was no rush to define anything, no pressure to explain the fluttering tension between us. Just two people, side by side, acknowledging their emotions through touch, shared stories, and lingering glances. When I finally stood to leave, she placed her hand on my arm, a gentle anchor that spoke volumes. I'm glad you're here, she said simply, her eyes reflecting the quiet honesty of her words. Walking back to my apartment, I felt lighter, warmer, as if the vulnerability we shared had created a safe space for both of us. That night, I realized our connection had shifted. What had begun as curiosity and subtle attraction had deepened into trust, comfort, and something undeniably tender. Our nightly visits were no longer just a habit, they had become a lifeline, a shared moment of emotional intimacy that neither of us wanted to end. The nights had taken on a rhythm of their own. Each visit, each conversation, each shared silence was slowly weaving a bond that neither of us could ignore. By now, the initial excitement of curiosity had softened into something more profound, a quiet awareness that the connection we shared was becoming an essential part of our nights. One evening, I arrived to find her perched on the balcony railing, a cup of tea warming her hands. The city below was washed in the golden glow of streetlights, and a gentle breeze carried the faint scent of wet pavement and her lingering perfume. She didn't greet me immediately, just glanced sideways with that familiar, knowing smile, as if silently acknowledging the unspoken truth between us. You're here again, she said softly, but without the playful teasing of before. There was a warmth in her voice now, a quiet comfort that made my chest tighten. I hope you don't mind. I enjoy these nights. I don't mind, I admitted, leaning against the railing beside her. I've started looking forward to them. The words felt heavier than I expected, yet necessary. There was an ease in saying them aloud, as if giving voice to something we had both been thinking for some time. We sat in companionable silence for a few moments, our shoulders brushing lightly. I noticed how naturally her hand rested near mine, and this time, I didn't shy away. My fingers found hers almost instinctively, a slow, deliberate touch that carried reassurance, warmth, and a silent acknowledgement of our mutual feelings. She let her hand stay in mine, a small squeeze conveying more than words ever could. You know, she murmured after a while, her eyes searching mine. I didn't expect to enjoy your company like this. Not so much. Her voice held a vulnerability that she rarely showed to anyone, a delicate admission that made my heart ache softly. I didn't either, I replied. But I'm glad. Glad we found this. The way she looked at me, warm, accepting, and gently teasing all at once, made the moment feel suspended in time. It wasn't about rushing toward anything physical. It was about acknowledging the feelings that had been quietly building with every glance, every brush of hands, every shared silence. There was laughter too, soft and easy, as we reminisced about small moments from our previous visits. The clumsy way I had spilled tea one night, the way she had brushed it off with a smile, the subtle teasing that had always followed. These shared memories, small as they were, strengthened the intimacy between us. As the night deepened, I realized that I no longer approached our visits with hesitation or uncertainty. I anticipated her calls, the way her eyes would linger on mine, the warmth of her presence beside me. And I noticed, almost with quiet delight, that she felt the same. There was no need for grand gestures, no need for dramatic declarations. The subtle touches, the lingering glances, the quiet conversations, they were all proof enough. When I finally left that night, the air outside felt colder than inside, but I carried with me a warmth that stayed long after I reached my apartment. We both knew it now, the bond between us was undeniable, mutual, and slowly, beautifully, deepening into something that neither of us wanted to define too quickly, but couldn't ignore. By now, the rhythm of our nightly visits had become something comforting, almost sacred. The city outside had quieted into a gentle hum, and the soft glow of streetlights filtered through her balcony, painting the space in warm golds and ambers. We had long stopped worrying about the casual rules of neighborly visits. These nights were ours, unhurried, intimate, and quietly filled with meaning. That evening, she was sitting on the balcony railing, a blanket draped loosely over her shoulders. Her cup of tea steamed in the cool night air, carrying with it the faint scent of vanilla and the familiar perfume I had come to recognize as hers. I joined her, taking the other end of the railing, letting the warmth of her presence seep into the space between us. We didn't speak immediately. The silence was comfortable, full of all the words we had said in the past nights, all the shared glances and unspoken feelings that had been building slowly. Our shoulders brushed, not deliberately, yet intentionally enough that the small sparks of warmth seemed to settle in the air between us. The cityscape below twinkled like a scattered constellation, and the quiet breeze carried a gentle reminder of how alive the night felt when we were together. She leaned slightly toward me, just enough for our hands to meet. Our fingers intertwined naturally, a gentle pressure that spoke more than words ever could. I could feel the slow, steady beat of her pulse through the warmth of her hand, and for a moment, it felt as though time itself had paused. There was no rush, no tension, just the quiet, deliberate intimacy of being together, fully present. "I like this," she murmured softly, her head tilted just enough to catch the light on her face. "These nights, this, us?" I nodded, squeezing her hand gently. "Me too. It's perfect the way it is." We talked for a while longer, about small, trivial things, the distant sound of a dog barking, the way the streetlight flickered in the wind, the faint glow of her neighbor's apartment across the way. Every detail felt alive, infused with the warmth of shared presence. And yet, underneath the ordinary chatter was the extraordinary, the quiet acknowledgement that what we had built was rare, delicate, and deeply meaningful. At one point, she shifted closer, resting her cheek lightly against my shoulder. The warmth of her body pressed gently into mine, and I felt a calm, almost dizzying sense of rightness. There was no need for words. The comfort, the trust, the unspoken affection was enough. I wrapped an arm loosely around her, feeling the steady rhythm of her heartbeat against my chest. As the night deepened, I realized that the age difference, the quiet hesitation, all the unspoken fears, they no longer mattered. What remained was a bond that had grown organically, slowly, beautifully. Something tender, respectful, and profoundly human. When I finally stood to leave, she held my hand just a fraction longer at the door, her eyes reflecting the soft, golden glow of the balcony. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked with a quiet smile. "Same time," I said, And we both knew it was more than a routine, it was a promise. Walking back to my apartment, the night air was cool against my skin, but my chest was warm. For the first time, I felt a quiet certainty. The slow, patient connection we had nurtured had blossomed into something real. Something enduring. Something worth every nightly visit, every lingering glance, every gentle touch. And in that quiet, unhurried way that only the night could hold, I realized we had found each other.